What if the tale of Exodus unveils not merely a liberation of flesh, but a celestial war where the Almighty descends from the heights of glory to shatter the eternal chains of darkness that bind the soul to its ruin? A conflict that echoes through the ages, can a heart, buried beneath the ashes of despair and lost in the labyrinth of its own making, amidst the ruins of broken dreams, discern the soft echo of a God whose eyes pierce the veil of time, space, and the deepest sorrows of humanity? What if the plagues that scourged Egypt were divine proclamations, each a thunderous declaration that no false god, no earthly power clad in gold and stone, can stand before the one who utters, "I am," with an authority that shakes the foundations of creation and stills the hearts of men? Have you ever lingered in a night so impenetrable, so thick with the weight of your own fears and the shadows of your past, that only a miracle's light could fracture its dominion over your trembling? Weary spirit, will you embark with us on a journey where the heavens quake with the fury of divine will? The stars tremble in their courses, and the fate of a people and perhaps your own redemption hangs suspended in the balance of a love that defies the boundaries of mortal understanding. This is no ordinary Exodus. It is a revelation, a sacred unmasking of a God whose love pursues with unrelenting fervor, a flame that burns through the darkness of human rebellion, whose justice resounds through the corridors of eternity with a voice that cannot be silenced, a thunder that awakens the sleeping soul, and whose plan threads redemption into the very essence of humanity with threads of grace and power that weave a tapestry of hope. The book of Exodus transcends the boundaries of mere history, a record etched in parchment and stone. It is a mirror held before your soul, reflecting the shackles you carry in silence, the iron that clanks with every step, the freedom you yearn for with every breath that escapes your lips, and the Creator who seeks you even now, his gaze unwavering through the storms of your life, a light that pierces the gloom. Through the ancient echoes preserved in texts like the Book of Jubilees, a treasure trove of divine insight, and the immutable truth of Scripture, a foundation that stands firm, we unearth hidden depths, spiritual battles waged beyond the reach of mortal sight, where angelic sentinels stand guard in the shadows of the unseen, their wings a shield against the forces of chaos, and mysteries that awaken the dormant spirit with a call to rise from the ashes of despair. Today, we tread the scorched sands of Egypt, where the air trembles with the cries of the oppressed, a sound that rises like a lament to the heavens, and ascend the trembling heights of divine encounter. Following a people delivered not only from the irons of slavery that bite the flesh, but into the tender, everlasting embrace of a God who longs to dwell among them, his presence a sanctuary in the wilderness. Are you prepared to witness the Exodus as it has never been unveiled before? To see the hand of the divine in every step of this sacred odyssey? To feel the weight of its truth in the depths of your being? In the dawn of time, when the earth was young and the stars were newly kindled, Egypt emerges a land of opulent majesty veiled in a suffocating cloak of oppression that chokes the spirit as surely as it binds the body. A paradox of beauty and brutality. Imagine the air, dense with the acrid bite of sun-scorched clay that clings to the lungs with every breath, the pungent tang of human sweat glistening on weary brows under a relentless sun that burns without mercy, and the faint, earthy musk of the Nile's muddy embrace wafting through the stillness like a haunting refrain that lingers in the memory. The sun hangs low, a molten orb casting its golden radiance across Pharaoh's towering monuments, their stones polished to a mirror-like gleam by the labor of enslaved hands, each block a testament to a king's vanity, a monument to his pride that reaches toward the heavens. The Israelites toil beneath this unyielding light, their fingers raw and bleeding, and they knead straw into bricks with a rhythm born of despair, their hands moving with a mechanical precision that speaks of a hope long lost, their backs bowed under the merciless crack of leather whips that slice the air like a requiem for the soul, the sound a constant companion in their suffering. The dust-choked expanse echoes with this torment, a rhythmic pulse that blends with the low, mournful groans of a people whose hope has withered like parched reeds in a forsaken marsh. their voices rising and falling like the wind over a graveyard, a chorus of pain that carries on the breeze. The Nile flows nearby, its waters a shimmering mirror reflecting the heavens in a cruel irony that mocks their plight. Yet it harbors a decree as cold and unyielding as the stone idols that line Pharaoh's courts. A command etched in the heart of tyranny every Hebrew boy born must be cast into its depths. A grim offering to preserve the tyrant's reign and stifle the promise of deliverance that whispers in their dreams. Picture a mother, her heart a tempest of grief and resolve, her hands trembling as she gathers reeds along the riverbank, the coarse fibers cutting into her skin like tiny blades that draw blood, the water lapping at her feet with a sound that mocks her despair, a rhythm that beats in time with her sorrow. The sharp, resinous scent of pitch fills her lungs as she seals a fragile basket with meticulous care, her fingers working with a desperation that fuels her hope, her whispered prayers rising like a fragile thread of smoke into the heavy air. Each word a plea to the God who watches from above as she places her infant son within, his tiny form a beacon of hope in a world of shadows, his breath a fragile promise. The basket sways gently on the current, reeds whispering secrets to the wind that carries them away, the water rippling with each movement, carrying Moses toward an uncertain destiny beneath a sky streaked with the somber hues of impending night, the stars holding their breath as if awaiting the hand of God to move the waters of fate. This is the genesis of our tale, not a triumphant anthem sung in victory by a people freed, but a lament forged in the crucible of tragedy. A cry that echoes through the ages with a sound that cannot be silenced. The Israelites, heirs to the covenant sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the quiet of ancient tents under a canopy of stars, are a people erased from the annals of worldly glory, their names forgotten by the empires that rise and fall, yet indelibly etched upon the heart of God, their stories written in the book of His remembrance with an ink that does not fade. Their suffering is not overlooked, not lost in the vastness of divine purpose that spans the cosmos, not ignored by the one who sees all. As Psalm 34:17 proclaims with solemn assurance, a promise carved in the stone of truth. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The book of Jubilees unveils the spiritual abyss of their bondage, a nation not only bound by the iron will of Pharaoh, whose decrees are etched in stone and enforced with the lash, but ensnared by the spectral dominion of Egypt's false deities, a pantheon of shadows that promise power, yet deliver only chains that bind the spirit. Ra, the sun god, casts his golden gaze across the land, a beacon of unassailable power that blinds the eye with his brilliance. Hapi, the spirit of the Nile, is worshipped as the breath of life incarnate, his waters a false savior that cannot save. Yet these idols are but hollow echoes before the God of Abraham, whose covenant burns with an eternal flame that no darkness can extinguish, a light that pierces the veil. Exodus 2:24-25 bears witness to this divine attentiveness with unshakable clarity. A testimony that resounds: God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. The cries of his people ascend like a fragrant offering, a sweet incense that stirs the heavens with its aroma, kindling a divine resolve to intervene with might that shakes the earth and mercy that heals the broken. His heart moved by the weight of their affliction, a compassion that knows no bounds. What does it mean to be remembered by God? To have your name called in the council of the divine, where the angels bow, it is no passive recollection, a mere flicker of memory in the mind of the infinite, but a sacred act, a ripple in the unseen realms where angelic hosts are summoned, their wings stirring the ether with a sound like distant thunder that rolls across the sky. And the Creator himself prepares to step into the dust of human sorrow with a purpose that spans the ages, a plan that unfolds with each breath. This is no distant deity, enthroned beyond the reach of mortal plea, insulated by the cold expanse of the cosmos where stars are born and die, but a God who sees every tear that traces a cheek with the precision of a craftsman shaping stone, hears every sob that escapes a broken spirit with the tenderness of a father cradling his child. and moves with purpose to redeem those who call upon his name, a redemption that reaches into the depths. Yet his timing is a mystery, a silent stretching of faith that tests the soul's endurance, a weight that refines like fire, purifying the heart. The Israelites endured years of silence, their prayers swallowed by the desert wind that howls through the night with a voice that chills, their hope flickering like a candle in a tempest's grip, its flame threatened by the gusts of despair that seek to extinguish it. Have you ever knelt in such silence, your heart a cry to a heaven that seems deaf, your voice lost in the void of unanswered longing, your spirit straining for a sign that does not come, a light that remains hidden? What chains bind you today? Fear that coils like a serpent in the shadows of your mind, its fangs dripping with doubt, shame that whispers accusations in the quiet hours when the world sleeps, or a past that clings like damp earth to your soul, refusing to release its hold, a weight that drags you down. The story of Exodus offers a whisper of hope, a promise that your cries pierce the throne of grace with a sound that cannot be ignored, a plea that reaches the ears of the Almighty, and God's deliverance, though veiled in mystery, draws ever nearer with each passing breath, a salvation that approaches like the dawn, as Isaiah 40:31 promises with unwavering truth, a vow that stands firm. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. In this crucible of despair, where the human spirit is tested by the fires of affliction and the divine hand remains hidden in the shadows, a deliverer is forged with divine intent, shaped by the flames of adversity for a purpose yet unrevealed, a vessel prepared for glory. Moses, the child plucked from the Nile's treacherous embrace, where the waters whispered death, grows within the gilded walls of Pharaoh's palace, a prince ensnared between two irreconcilable worlds, his life a paradox of privilege that glitters like gold and pain that cuts like a knife. The book of Jasher paints him as a soul divided, the fragrance of lotus blossoms and myrrh perfuming the air of his royal chambers with an intoxicating sweetness that fills the lungs, yet his heart pierced by the distant wails of his kin, a sound that seeps through the stone like a persistent lament, a cry that haunts his dreams and stirs his conscience. The clink of gold ornaments and the rustle of silk surround him, a symphony of opulence that fills the halls with a hollow echo. But his eyes cannot unsee the Hebrew slave, his back a map of scars etched by the whip, each mark a story of suffering that speaks of endurance, his gaze hollow with the exhaustion of a spirit crushed beneath the weight of bondage, a weariness that ages the young. One day, rage ignites within him like a hidden ember fanned by the winds of justice, a fire that cannot be contained, as he beholds an Egyptian taskmaster's cruelty, the whip descending with merciless precision, the slave's cry a dagger to his conscience that cuts deeper than any blade, a wound that bleeds with empathy. In a surge of reckless justice, he strikes the oppressor dead, the act a spark that shatters his world, and his life as a prince crumbles like glass upon the palace floor, the shards scattering into the dust of exile, a ruin of his former glory. Fleeing to Midian, Moses trades the splendor of Egypt for the austere silence of the wilderness, a land where the echoes of his former life fade into the vastness of the desert, a silence that speaks of solitude. Picture him now, a shepherd cloaked in rough wool that scratches against his skin with every movement, the scent of dust and dry grass clinging to him like a second garment, a fragrance of the earth, his hands calloused by the staff he leans upon, its wood worn smooth by the rhythm of his days, a companion in his loneliness. His dreams lie buried beneath the vast, star-strewn sky that stretches endlessly above, a canopy of light that offers no answers, his identity lost in the endless expanse of exile, a man adrift in a sea of sand where the horizon mocks his wandering. Yet this desolation is no accident of fate, no random turn of fortune's wheel that spins without purpose. As Proverbs 16:9 declares with divine wisdom, a truth that guides the lost. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. In Midian, Moses is schooled in the art of humility, his pride stripped away by the relentless sun that beats down with unsparing heat, a fire that refines, his patience honed by the slow rhythm of tending flocks that move like shadows across the dunes, a patience that steadies the soul, his dependence on God rooted deep like an oasis in barren land, a silent preparation for a calling that will echo through the ages, a destiny shaped by the hand of the divine. Have you ever wandered in your own wilderness? A desolate place where the landmarks of your life crumble, your plans shattered like brittle clay beneath a hammer's blow, your purpose shrouded in a mist that refuses to lift, leaving you groping in the dark with hands that tremble. What lessons does God whisper to you in the stillness? When the world falls silent and only His voice remains, a faint thread of light in the gloom, a word that pierces the silence. The wilderness is not a place of abandonment, a forsaken corner where hope dies and the spirit withers, but a forge where the soul is refined, its dross burned away to reveal the gold within. A crucible where the divine hand shapes the clay of your being with a potter's care. Moses, once a prince adorned in splendor, his raiment a testament to earthly glory that dazzles the eye, becomes a shepherd shaped by hardship, his heart softened by years beneath the open sky. The stars his only companions in the solitude of night, their light a reminder of the God who watches with unblinking eyes. The book of Jubilees describes this exile as a sacred crucible, where Moses' arrogance is consumed by the desert's fire, its flames licking away the dross of pride with a heat that purifies, and his trust in God grows like a seedling piercing arid soil, drawing life from hidden springs that bubble forth in the silence, a trust that sustains. What wilderness do you tread today, a season of loss that weighs like a stone upon your chest, a burden that crushes the breath, a valley of uncertainty that clouds your vision with doubt, a fog that obscures the path, a time of waiting that tests your resolve with every passing hour, a trial that stretches the soul trust that God is at work, molding you with hands both gentle and firm, preparing you for a purpose you cannot yet fathom, a destiny written in the stars that shine above, as Psalm 37:23 assures with tender certainty, a promise that holds fast. The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in Him. He delights in every detail of their lives, guiding them with a love that never fails. Then comes the moment that fractures the ordinary, a pivot upon which the course of history turns with a sound like the breaking of dawn, a light that pierces the night. One day, as Moses guides his flock near Horeb, the mountain of God, a vision seizes his gaze with an otherworldly pull that draws him from the mundane into the eternal, a call that cannot be ignored. A bush burns, its branches wreathed in flames that dance with ferocious beauty, yet do not devour. A paradox ablaze against the desert's muted tones, its light a beacon that pierces the wasteland with hope, a flame that defies the laws of nature. The air grows heavy, thick with the acrid scent of scorched earth that rises like an offering to the heavens, a fragrance that fills the lungs, and a faint, ethereal hum, as if the ground itself quivers in reverence to a presence beyond comprehension, a vibration that resonates in the marrow of his bones, a sound that stirs the soul. Moses steps closer, his sandals crunching on the rocky terrain with a sound that echoes in the stillness, a rhythm that marks his approach, the heat brushing his skin like a living breath that warms yet does not burn, the glow casting long, trembling shadows across the sand that shift with each step, a dance of light and dark. A voice thunders from the flames, resonant and commanding, a sound that shakes the earth and stirs the soul with a power that cannot be contained. Moses trembling, he answers with a voice barely his own, a whisper swallowed by the majesty before him, a sound that trembles on the edge of awe. Here I am. The command follows, holy and unyielding, a directive that brooks no delay, a word that carries the weight of eternity. Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Exodus 3:4-5. Imagine the weight of that instant, the searing warmth against his face that warms, yet does not consume. The crackle of fire mingling with a silence that deafens the senses. A quiet that roars with the presence of the divine. the overwhelming presence of a being who dwarfs the stars. The earth, the very concept of time. A presence that fills the air with a weight that bends the knee and stills the heart. God declares with authority that shakes the soul to its core. A proclamation that resonates through the ages. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Moses hides his face, his spirit laid bare before the eternal, his breath caught in the throat of awe, his hands trembling as he removes his sandals. The dust of the holy ground cool beneath his feet, a touch that grounds him in the presence of the divine. This is no fleeting vision, a dream to be dismissed with the morning light that fades, but a divine confrontation that redefines the destiny of a nation and a man. A moment that alters the course of history with a single word. The burning bush, untouched by its own flames, mirrors the unchanging nature of God, infinite, sovereign, eternal. A flame that consumes yet sustains. A light that endures through the ages. A beacon that guides the lost. As Malachi 3:6 proclaims, with unshakable truth, a declaration that stands firm. I, the Lord, do not change. God speaks of the Israelites' suffering, a litany of pain that has reached his ears with a sound that cannot be ignored, a cry that pierces the heavens, his resolve to deliver them a vow etched in the heavens with the ink of his will, a promise that cannot be broken, and his call to Moses, a summons that cannot be evaded, a mission that demands obedience. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Exodus 3:10. But Moses falters, his voice trembling with the weight of doubt that presses upon his spirit like a heavy cloak. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God's response is a promise that steadies the trembling soul, an anchor in the storm that rages within. I will be with you, Exodus 3:12. Still, Moses hesitates, his fears rising like a tide that threatens to overwhelm his lack of eloquence. A stammering chain that binds his tongue, a barrier that silences his voice, the scorn of the people, a looming shadow that darkens his path, a rejection that looms large, his own unworthiness, a burden too heavy to bear, a weight that bows his shoulders and bends his will. God, in his infinite patience, equips him with signs of power that defy the natural order. Miracles that speak of the divine. The staff becomes a serpent, writhing in the dust with a hiss that startles the air. A sign of authority, his hand turns leprous, then heals. A miracle etched in flesh that speaks of divine restoration. And Aaron is appointed as his voice, a bridge over the chasm of his weakness, a companion in the task. As 2 Corinthians 12:9 reveals with gentle authority, a truth that lifts the fallen. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. What does the burning bush unveil to the seeking heart? A revelation that pierces the veil of the ordinary and illuminates the path. It reveals a God who calls the broken, the hesitant, the flawed vessels of clay that crack under pressure, yet are mended by his hand with a touch that heals. Like Moses, we often shrink from his voice, our doubts a louder chorus than his call, a cacophony that drowns his whisper. Our fears a wall that stands between us and his purpose, a barrier built of our own making with bricks of insecurity. What burning bush stands before you, a moment where God whispers through the flames of your trial, his voice a clarion in the chaos that surrounds, yet fear holds you captive in its iron grip, refusing to release its hold, a chain that binds the spirit. What inadequacies echo in the chambers of your heart, whispering with a voice that cuts like a blade, I am not enough, I cannot bear this burden. I am unworthy of his call. A litany of self-doubt that echoes in the silence. The bush burns to proclaim a truth eternal, a promise that stands firm through the ages. A light that guides God's presence is your strength. His call rests not on your might, which falters and fails in the hour of need, but on his boundless power, which knows no limit, a power that lifts the fallen. As you ponder this sacred encounter, ask with a soul laid bare before the divine, a heart open to the truth. Where is God summoning you to step forth in faith, trusting his might to overcome your frailty, His grace to lift you from the dust of despair. What step of obedience does he require? And will you take it with trembling hands? Your heart open to his will, your spirit yielded to his purpose. Psalm 138:8 offers solace like a balm that soothes the wounded spirit. A promise that endures, the Lord will fulfill his purpose for me. Your love, O Lord, endures forever. Do not abandon the works of your hands. From Horeb's consecrated soil, where the dust bears the imprint of a holy encounter that lingers like a sacred memory, Moses returns to Egypt, the desert wind carrying whispers of doubt that gnaw at his resolve like persistent shadows that creep across the sand. The memory of the burning bush, a flame that ignites his spirit with a fire that cannot be quenched, a light that guides his steps. Imagine the journey, the crunch of sand beneath his weary feet, a sound that echoes in the vastness of the wilderness, the distant howl of a jackal piercing the velvet night with a cry that chills the blood and stirs the heart, the weight of a mission that could topple the mightiest of empires pressing upon his shoulders with a burden that bends but does not break. A load that tests his strength. He stands before Pharaoh, a humble shepherd facing a god-king enthroned in splendor that blinds the eye and deafens the heart, a ruler who deems himself divine, a man clothed in the trappings of power. The palace gleams with polished marble that reflects the light like a mirror, its halls resonant with the rich scent of myrrh and frankincense that fills the air with an intoxicating sweetness, a fragrance that masks the decay within. Its walls adorned with hieroglyphs that proclaim Pharaoh's divine reign, each stroke a testament to his arrogance, a boast carved in stone that echoes through the corridors. Moses and Aaron speak with a quiet authority that belies their humble garb, their voices steady amid the opulence that surrounds. A contrast to the grandeur. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, "Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Exodus 5:1. Pharaoh's laughter rings out, a sound as cold as the stone beneath his throne, a chill that freezes the air. His voice laced with scorn that cuts like a blade forged in bitterness. Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Exodus 5:2. Thus begins a cosmic duel, not a contest between men of flesh and blood, frail and mortal, but a clash between Yahweh, the one true God, whose name is a tower of strength that stands unshaken, and the pantheon of Egypt's false deities. A war waged in the seen realm of plagues that ravage the land and the unseen realm of spiritual battle. A conflict that shakes the heavens with its fury and the earth with its might. The plagues that follow are divine judgments, each a precise and deliberate strike against the idols that Egypt holds sacred with a devotion that borders on madness, a worship that blinds the mind. The Nile turns to blood, its waters thick with the reek of decay that clings to the air like a shroud that chokes the breath, a direct affront to Hapi, the river god revered as the source of life, whose power is proven a lie that crumbles under the weight of truth. The stench rises like a miasma that fills the nostrils with its foulness, fish rotting along the banks, their silver scales dulled by death. The lifeblood of Egypt, now a grave that mocks its deity with every ripple that disturbs the surface, a silent testimony to its fall. Frogs swarm the land, their croaking a ceaseless dirge that invades the sanctity of palaces with golden thrones and the humblest of hovels with earthen floors. A challenge to Heket, the goddess of fertility, whose power proves impotent against the will of the Almighty, her domain overrun by her own symbol. Gnats cloud the air in a buzzing shroud that obscures the sun with a veil of torment. Flies darken the sky like a plague of shadows that blot out the light with a darkness that chills. Boils scar the flesh with a burning torment that sears the skin with a pain that lingers. And hail falls mingled with tongues of fire that consume the earth with a fury that spares nothing, a destruction that leaves no stone unturned. Each plague escalates, unraveling the false security of Egypt's pantheon with surgical precision, a dismantling of every idol that dares to rival the true God, a judgment that exposes their weakness. The Book of Jubilees hints at a spiritual war beneath the surface, a battlefield where angelic legions clash in the unseen. their swords flashing against the darkness with a light that blinds the wicked, their presence a silent testament to the cosmic stakes that hang in the balance, a struggle that shapes the destiny of nations. By the third plague, Pharaoh's magicians, their own arts exhausted and their pride humbled by the failure of their craft, concede with reluctant awe, their voices trembling. This is the finger of God, Exodus 8:19. Yet Pharaoh's heart hardens, his pride in a bulwark that defies the evidence of his eyes, a fortress unyielding against the truth that thunders from on high, a rebellion that seals his fate. Picture Egypt now, a land unmade, its glory reduced to ashes that drift on the wind like the remnants of a dream, its beauty turned to dust. The air hangs heavy with the incessant buzz of flies that fill the ears with their drone. A sound that grates on the nerves, the putrid stench of dead livestock rotting in the fields. A smell that clings to the nostrils and sickens the stomach with its foulness. The wails of a people undone by loss echoing through the streets like a dirge that never ends. A lament that carries on the breeze. Homes are overrun with frogs, their slimy bodies littering floors in a grotesque carpet that squelches underfoot with a sound that turns the stomach. Their croaking, a relentless torment that invades the mind with a cacophony that drives men to the edge of madness, a noise that drowns out reason. The sky, once the domain of Ra, is cloaked in a darkness so tangible it presses against the spirit with a weight that crushes hope, a void that endures for 3 days, stripping away the illusion of the sun god's power and leaving the land in a silence that screams with the absence of light. A hush that deafens. The book of Jasher describes the priests trembling, their rituals powerless against the might of Yahweh, their voices stilled as their gods remain mute, their altars cold and forsaken, their incense a mockery in the face of divine judgment, a fragrance that fades through it all. Moses stands resolute, his voice a beacon cutting through the chaos like a light in the storm, a sound that offers hope. Let my people go. His persistence is a lesson in faith, a call to endure when hope seems a distant mirage that shimmers on the horizon, a testament to the strength found in obedience to God's command, a strength that flows from the throne of grace like a river that never runs dry. As Romans 15:4 teaches with timeless wisdom, a truth that endures, for everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. What do the plagues reveal of God's eternal nature? A revelation that speaks to the heart of every soul with a voice that cannot be ignored. They unveil a God of justice, confronting the arrogance of human power with a hand that cannot be stayed, a force that bends the knee of kings and shatters the thrones of tyrants, and the deceit of idolatry with a truth that cannot be denied, a light that exposes every shadow and banishes the darkness. Yet they also reveal his mercy, each plague a summons to repent, a chance to turn from wrath and embrace grace, a window of redemption offered even to the hardest heart that beats with pride, a mercy that lingers. Pharaoh's defiance is a mirror held to our own souls, reflecting the pride that blinds us to God's voice, a veil that obscures his face, the stubbornness that turns us from his path, a refusal to yield, the rebellion that builds walls against his love, a fortress of self. Where do you resist his call, clinging to the pride that elevates self above the divine, a throne of your own making that crumbles under scrutiny, or to false idols that promise security yet deliver only chains that bind the spirit? A bondage that deceives. Psalm 95:7-8 warns with urgent clarity, a cry that pierces the silence. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion. During the time of testing in the wilderness, the plagues beckon us to surrender, to trust the one who holds all dominion in his grasp, a trust that frees the soul from its prison, a liberation that heals. Have you ever faced a pride that veiled your eyes to truth, a stubbornness that turned you from his path, a heart that refused to bend under the weight of his love? What modern idol's wealth that glitters but fades like morning mist, a treasure that rusts, status that crumbles under the weight of time, a crown that falls, or self-reliance that fails in the hour of need? A staff that breaks, claim your allegiance in the quiet hours when the world falls silent. A time of testing, as Matthew 6:24 cautions with sobering weight. A warning that resounds. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. As the ninth plague lifts, the darkness receding like a tide drawn back by an unseen hand, its shadows retreating into the corners of the land where they linger. Egypt stands on the precipice of final judgment, its foundations trembling under the weight of divine wrath that shakes the earth. God prepares his people for deliverance through the Passover, an act that will seal their identity as his own for all time, a mark that will endure through generations, a sign that speaks of belonging. Moses gathers the elders, his voice steady amid the tension that thickens the air like a fog that obscures the path, a calm amidst the storm that brews on the horizon, a peace that defies the chaos. On the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family. One without defect, he declares with solemn authority. His words a command that carries the weight of heaven, a decree that echoes with divine purpose, Exodus 12:3. For 4 days, the lamb dwells among them, its gentle bleating a poignant reminder of the cost that looms like a shadow over their homes. Its presence, a silent teacher of the sacrifice that will pave the way to freedom, its eyes reflecting the innocence that will be offered, a purity that speaks. On the 14th day, as twilight cloaks the land in a mantle of shadow that deepens with each passing moment, the lamb is slain, its blood collected in basins that gleam faintly in the firelight. The crimson liquid, a stark contrast to the earthen vessels, a color that speaks of life and death intertwined. Picture the scene: families gathered in the shadowed confines of their homes, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood that stains the earth with a hue that speaks of sacrifice, the crackle of fire as the lamb roasts, a sound that fills the silence, the scent of roasted flesh mingling with the smoke of hearths that flicker like prayers lifted to the sky, a fragrance that rises. Using hyssop branches, they smear the blood on their doorposts and lintels, crimson streaks glowing in the firelight, a sign of trust in God's unbreakable promise that resonates with the power of eternity. A vow that stands firm: when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt, Exodus 12:13. The night falls with an eerie stillness, the silence broken only by the soft bleat of lambs offered in faith, a sound that pierces the quiet like a note of hope that lifts the spirit, and the murmur of prayers that rise like incense. Their words a fragrant offering to the heavens, a plea that ascends. Parents cradle their children close, their sandals laced with care, the leather creaking softly with each movement, a sound that speaks of readiness, staffs gripped tightly in hands that tremble with anticipation, their hearts a blend of fear that clutches at the throat with icy fingers, and unyielding hope that lifts the spirit with a warmth that endures. The scent of roasted lamb fills the air, a sacred aroma that mingles with the smoke of hearths that flicker like beacons in the night, a light that guides, the tension palpable as they wait for the hand of God to move with a power that cannot be contained, a force that shakes the earth. The Book of Jubilees calls this a divine covenant, the blood a seal proclaiming these people as the cherished possession of Yahweh, a mark that separates them from the wrath to come, a sign that speaks of belonging in a world of chaos, a refuge in the storm. At midnight, a wail rises across Egypt, a sound that pierces the night like a blade forged in sorrow, a cry that cuts the air as every firstborn, from Pharaoh's heir enthroned in splendor to the lowliest servant toiling in obscurity, falls beneath the judgment of the Almighty, their lives extinguished in a moment, a silence that follows. The cries reverberate, a collective lament that shakes the earth with its intensity, a dirge for a nation broken by its own defiance, a sound that carries on the wind like a warning that echoes through the ages. But in the homes marked by the blood, silence reigns supreme, a sanctuary carved by faith, a haven under the shadow of the wings of the Most High, where the breath of life continues undisturbed, a peace that prevails. The Passover transcends mere deliverance, a physical escape from the bonds of slavery that bite the flesh. It is a foreshadowing of the ultimate sacrifice that will echo through eternity, with a resonance that shakes the foundations of the soul. A promise that endures. John 1:29 proclaims with prophetic clarity, a voice that rings through time. Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world, Jesus, the flawless Lamb without blemish, shed his blood to mark the hearts of believers with a seal that shields them from the eternal judgment that awaits the unrepentant. A sacrifice that spans the divide between heaven and earth, a bridge that leads to life. The Passover calls us to trust in God's provision, to act in faith even when his ways confound the mind with their mystery and challenge the heart with their demands. A trust that requires the surrender of self, a letting go of the known. What does the Lamb's blood signify for you? A mark upon your soul that declares your redemption, or a mystery yet unclaimed? A gift awaiting your acceptance with open hands? Are there corners of your heart where trust falters, where obedience feels a burden too great to bear, a load that bows the back, where the cost of surrender looms large like a mountain unscaled, its peak hidden in clouds that obscure the summit? 1 Peter 1:18-19 reminds with gentle authority, a truth that lifts. You were redeemed with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. Have you embraced the freedom his sacrifice offers with open arms? A freedom that lifts the spirit to the heights? Or do shadows of bondage, guilt that lingers like a specter that haunts the night, fear that binds like iron that rusts, pride that deceives like a mirage that promises water, yet delivers sand, still hold you in their grasp, refusing to release their claim with a grip that tightens? The Passover also binds God's people in a unity that mirrors the divine heart, a tapestry woven with threads of shared faith and mutual strength that hold fast. The Israelites were saved not as solitary souls adrift in the wilderness, lost in the vastness, but as a nation united under the sign of the blood. Their deliverance, a communal triumph that speaks of God's love for his own, a love that unites. So too, we are called to fellowship, to lift one another in faith with hands that support, to bear each other's burdens as a testament to the grace that flows from the throne, a community that reflects the heart of the divine, a light that shines. Hebrews 10:24-25 urges with compelling grace, a call that resounds. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. How can you strengthen the community that surrounds you? A beacon of light in a world shrouded in the darkness of despair. A lamp that guides the lost through the night. Who in your life needs the encouragement of your faith to trust in God's unchanging promise? A word of hope in their night of trial, a hand to lift them from the pit. The Passover teaches that faith is not a solitary journey, a path walked alone in silence with no companion. It flourishes in the shared strength of God's people, a fellowship that binds heart to heart with the cords of love, a bond that endures. As the lament of Egypt fades into the night's embrace, a sound that lingers like a fading echo that haunts the memory. Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron in the depths of despair, his voice fractured by grief that cracks the silence like brittle glass underfoot. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested, he commands. A surrender wrung from a heart hardened yet broken by the weight of loss. His words a reluctant concession to the power he cannot defy. A defeat that tastes of ashes, Exodus 12:31. The Israelites, laden with gold that glints in the firelight with a promise of wealth, silver that chimes with each step like a song of freedom, and garments bestowed by their oppressors in a frantic bid for mercy. A gift born of fear, prepared to depart from the land of their bondage, a place of pain. Picture the Exodus, a nation moving as one, their footsteps a soft thunder in the pre-dawn hush, a sound that reverberates through the stillness with a rhythm that speaks of hope. The air heavy with the scent of dust, stirred under cover of night with footsteps muffled. It is a divine procession, a people stepping into freedom under the watchful gaze of the Almighty. Their hearts lifted by the memory of blood-stained doorposts that mark their deliverance, a sign that guides. Yet the path ahead will test their faith with trials that will forge their souls anew. A journey that will demand more than they can yet comprehend. A road that leads through fire and shadow. What does this moment unveil to the seeking spirit? A revelation that speaks to the depths of the human heart, with a voice that cannot be ignored. God's deliverance is not merely freedom from the chains that bind the body, the irons that clank with every step, a sound that echoes, but freedom for worship, a liberation that calls the soul to serve and honor the one who redeems with a love that knows no bounds, a love that frees. The Israelites were freed not to wander aimlessly in the wilderness, a people without purpose adrift in the sand, but to offer their lives as a living testament to God's glory, a sacrifice of praise that rises like incense to the throne. Our salvation, too, is a sacred call to glorify Him with every breath, a worship that flows from a heart transformed by grace, a song that endures. Romans 12:1 urges with profound invitation, a plea that resounds. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. How do you live out your freedom in Christ? A gift purchased with divine blood that flows from the cross. A river of life are there chains of the past guilt that haunts like a shadow that never lifts, a ghost that lingers. Fear that paralyzes like a chain that binds the wrist with iron. Pride that deceives like a mirage that promises water, yet delivers sand. A lie that blinds that you cling to. Resisting His call to worship fully with a heart laid bare before the divine. As Psalm 23:4 assures with tender strength, the comfort that holds. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff. They comfort me. Reflect now on your own exodus, a personal pilgrimage mirrored in this ancient tale, a journey that echoes through your own life with a resonance that cannot be ignored, a call that stirs. What Red Sea looms before you? Its waters an impenetrable wall that mocks your courage with its vastness, a barrier that towers, its depths a mystery that chills your resolve with the promise of drowning, a threat that looms what Pharaoh pursues you. His voice, a lie of failure that echoes in the recesses of your mind, a whisper of despair that seeks to reclaim your soul and drag you back into the slavery of yesterday. A past that haunts the God who marked His people with the blood of the Lamb, a sign that turned away the angel of death with a power that spares, is the same God who walks with you through the valleys of shadow. His presence, a light that never fades, a staff that guides through the night, a rod that protects from the foe. As we pause at this threshold, a moment of reflection before the journey continues, a time to look within, ask with a heart laid open before the divine, a spirit yielded. Where is God calling you to trust His deliverance? To step into the unknown with faith as your guide, a compass in the storm that rages. What sacrifice does He seek from you? An offering of your will, your fears, your dreams, a gift laid at His feet. And will you mark your soul with the seal of obedience, trusting in the promise of His unfailing love that endures through the ages? A love that never fails. The Exodus is your story, a testament to a God who hears the silent cry that rises from the depths of the heart, delivers the captive soul with a mighty hand that breaks the chains, and claims you as His own with a love that spans the eternity of His being, a bond that cannot be broken. From the silence of blood-marked homes, where the breath of life lingered amidst Egypt's anguished wails that pierced the night with a sound that cut the soul like a blade forged in the fires of sorrow, a lament that rose like smoke into the heavens with a fragrance of despair. The journey of deliverance unfolds into a new dawn, a path carved by the unyielding will of the divine that echoes through the corridors of eternity with a resonance that stirs the deepest recesses of the heart and awakens the spirit from its slumber, with a call that cannot be silenced by the darkness. What if the parting of the Red Sea was not merely a miracle to behold with wide eyes that marvel at the wonder of creation unfolding before them? A spectacle that stuns the mind with awe and wonder, but a profound revelation of a God who commands the elements to bow before His sovereign purpose. a power that reshapes the world with a single breath, that moves mountains with a force that shifts the earth, stills the seas with a whisper that calms the waves, and parts the heavens with a gesture that commands the chaos with an authority that reigns supreme in a people. Freed yet trembling with fear, that clutches the heart with icy fingers, that freeze the blood and numb the mind with a chill that penetrates to the core of their being. Find strength in the shadow of waters that rise like eternal walls. A sanctuary amidst the storm that rages with a fury that threatens to reclaim the lost, with a power that pursues with relentless might. A refuge in the chaos that surrounds, with a darkness that looms like a shroud that envelops the spirit. What if the wilderness, vast and unforgiving with its endless sands that stretch to the horizon like a sea without end, its dunes a testament to desolation that stretches the eye with a vastness that overwhelms the senses? Was not a punishment cast upon the weary and lost in their wanderings, the dust of despair that clings to the skin like a burden, but a sacred crucible where faith is forged anew, tempered by the fires of trial that burn with a heat that refines the soul with a purity that cleanses the dross, and refined by the hand of God with a care that molds the spirit into something eternal, with a purpose that endures through the ages with a strength that holds. Have you ever felt the weight of a promise unfulfilled? Its echo lingering in the silence of your soul, like a whisper that fades into the void of doubt that haunts with a shadow that lingers like a ghost. A sound that echoes through the chambers, yet trusted in the one who holds the future in his hands. A future unseen yet certain, with a certainty that calms the trembling heart and steadies the wavering mind, with a peace that soothes the storm within, with a tranquility that heals. Will you follow this odyssey, where the mountain of God thunders with a voice that shakes the soul to its depths? A sound that reverberates through the ages with a power that transforms the spirit with a strength that uplifts the fallen. And the heart is called to stand before the holy. A summons that cannot be ignored, with a call that resonates with a strength that sustains, and a grace that redeems the broken, with a mercy that restores the lost. The exodus from Egypt marks but the beginning. A tentative step from the bondage of iron chains that bit the flesh, with a pain that lingers like a scar, etched deep into the skin, with a mark that remains through the years, with a memory that haunts into a wilderness of testing and triumph. A land where the soul is shaped by the divine hand, with a touch that transforms the innermost being and renews the spirit with a light that shines through the darkness with a glow that guides. The Israelites, marked by the blood of the Lamb that turned away the angel of death, with a power that spares the innocent, with a mercy that endures through the ages, with a grace that holds the faithful, with a strength that supports. Step into freedom, their hearts lifted by the memory of Pharaoh's broken will. A victory that resounds through the night, with a triumph that sings like a psalm of praise, that rises to the heavens with a melody that lifts, yet shadowed by the uncertainty of the path that stretches before them. A road shrouded in mist that obscures the way, with a veil that hides the destination, and tests the faith with a challenge that probes the depths of the spirit, with a trial that refines. This is no tale of easy victory, a story sung with carefree joy under a clear sky that shines with a light that blinds the eye with its brilliance, that dazzles the vision with a radiance that overwhelms. But a saga of a God who leads with a pillar of fire that burns bright, with a light that guides the lost through the darkness, with a flame that endures through the storm, with a heat that comforts, provides with a hand that feeds the hungry, with a bounty that sustains the weary, through the trial with a provision that lasts through the famine, with a grace that overflows, and dwells among his people with a presence that transforms the heart, with a grace that heals the broken and restores the fallen, with a touch that mends the wounds, with a mercy that lifts. Revealing his nature through trials that refine like gold in the furnace that purifies the dross, with a heat that cleanses the impurities, with a fire that burns, and revelations that uplift the spirit to new heights, with a hope that soars above the storm, with a flight that inspires the faithful, with a vision that guides. The Book of Jubilees whispers of angelic guidance. Their wings a silent shield that protects, with a strength that endures through the tempest, with a power that shields the vulnerable, with a force that holds. The Book of Jasher paints the struggles with vivid strokes that bring the past to life, with color and sound that echo through the corridors of time, with a resonance that lingers in the memory, with an echo that resounds. And Scripture stands as the eternal witness, a light that guides through the darkness with a beam that pierces the gloom and illuminates the path with a glow that leads the weary with a path that opens. Today, we journey from the Red Sea's miraculous crossing, where the waters part like a curtain drawn by divine will, with a hand that moves the elements with a power that commands the chaos with a might that prevails, to the sacred heights of Sinai, where the law is given with a voice that thunders through the heavens, with a sound that shakes the earth, with a force that moves the mountains, with a power that resonates. From the manna that falls like dew from heaven, with a gentleness that soothes the parched soul, with a coolness that comforts the afflicted, with a touch that heals to the golden calf's betrayal, that stains the soul with shame, that lingers like a shadow, that darkens with a gloom, that oppresses with a weight that crushes. And finally to the tabernacle where God's presence rests like a cloud of glory, a dwelling place of the divine that sanctifies with a holiness that awes the beholder, with a vision that inspires the faithful, with a hope that endures through the ages, with a strength that holds. Are you ready to walk this path? To see the hand of the divine in every step of this sacred odyssey? To feel the weight of its truth in the depths of your being? A truth that calls with a voice that cannot be silenced, with a sound that resounds through the silence, with a power that moves. A summons that stirs the spirit to awaken from its slumber, with a light that shines, with a radiance that guides, with a glow that leads. As the Israelites flee the land of their bondage, the night air carries the scent of dust stirred by their exodus, a fragrance of liberation that lingers like a promise, fulfilled with a hope that endures through the trial of faith, with a strength that holds the heart with a cord that binds, and the faint aroma of sweat from their hurried flight that speaks of effort with a cost, a perfume of struggle that marks their passage, with the trail that guides the lost, with a path that opens. Their footsteps form a soft thunder on the earth, a rhythm that speaks of hope, reborn with a pulse that beats with life and vitality, with an energy that surges through the veins, with a force that moves, the sound of sandals on sand, a hymn of freedom that rises with a melody that lifts the soul to new heights, with a joy that overflows, with a gladness that sings, with a tune that heals. A song that echoes through the darkness, with a resonance that comforts the weary, with a peace that soothes, with a calm that restores. Yet the horizon darkens with the dust of Pharaoh's chariots, a storm of vengeance pursuing the freed, with a fury that threatens to reclaim the lost, with a power that pursues, with a might that endangers the soul. Their wheels a growl that reverberates through the night, with a menace that nears with each moment that passes, with a threat that grows, with a danger that looms. Their horses' breaths visible in the cool air, with a mist that chills the skin, with a cold that bites, with a sharpness that stings the flesh, with a pain that lingers. A sign of pursuit that looms, with a peril that advances. Imagine the scene unfolding before their eyes, with a vision that trembles with fear, that grips the heart with a terror that shakes the foundation. The Red Sea stretches before them, its waters a vast, unyielding barrier that mirrors the sky with a reflection that chills the blood, with a cold that freezes the veins, with a chill that numbs the mind, with a frost that binds. Its waves lapping with a sound that mocks their hope, a rhythm that beats in time with their fear, with a pulse that quickens the heart, with a dread that rises, with a shadow that falls, with a gloom that oppresses. A taunt that stings the spirit, with a wound that aches, with a pain that endures, with a sorrow that lingers. The air grows heavy with the salt of their tears that fall like rain, with a wetness that soaks the earth, with a sorrow that flows, with a stream that mourns the loss, with a lament that rises. The tang of sweat from their hurried flight that stings the skin, with a sharpness that burns the senses, with a pain that endures through the night, with a fire that scorches. And the distant clang of armor that pursues, with a menace that threatens, with a sound that nears, with a danger that grows, with a peril that advances, with a shadow that looms, with a darkness that threatens the light. Fear grips their hearts, a cold hand that clutches with icy fingers that freeze the blood, with a chill that numbs the mind, with a cold that penetrates to the core, with a frost that binds the spirit. Their voice is rising in a chorus of despair that pierces the night, with a cry that cuts the silence, with a sharpness that wounds the soul, with a pain that cuts deep, with a sorrow that aches. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die with Rituals? Exodus 14:11. A lament that echoes with the weight of doubt, with a burden that weighs the spirit with a load that crushes. A question that lingers with a shadow that darkens the path, with a gloom that oppresses the heart, with a darkness that falls. Yet Moses stands firm, his figure a rock amidst the storm that rages, with a fury that howls through the air, with a sound that roars, with a power that shakes the earth, with a force that moves, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade of light that pierces the gloom, with a beam that shines with hope, that endures, with a light that guides the lost, with a path that opens. Do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:13-14. A promise that steadies the trembling soul, and with a word that holds, with a strength that supports the weary, with a power that lifts. A vow that calms the storm within, with a peace that soothes, with a calm that heals the wounded, with a balm that mends. The ground trembles as a wind rises. A divine breath that parts the sea, with a force that shakes the earth, with a power that moves the elements, with a might that commands the chaos, with a will that shapes. The waters rising like walls of glass, their depths shimmering with an otherworldly light that dances, with a beauty that awes the beholder, with a wonder that stuns, with a marvel that inspires, with a spectacle that astounds. A display of power that defies, with a phenomenon that amazes the mind. The seabed emerges, dry and firm beneath their feet, a path carved by God's hand, with a precision that guides the lost, with a direction that leads, with a purpose that fulfills the promise, with a plan that endures. The sand cool and unyielding, with a texture that supports the weary, with a strength that holds, with a foundation that stands firm, with a rock that resists. A miracle that defies the laws of nature, with a sign that proclaims the divine, with a wonder that lifts the spirit. The book of Jasher describes the awe that grips them. The Israelites stepping forward with trembling steps that falter with uncertainty, that wavers with a doubt, that lingers with a shadow that haunts the soul. The sound of their sandals on the sand, a hymn of faith that rises with a melody that lifts their spirits, with a joy that overflows, with a song that sings, with a tune that heals. Their breaths held in wonder, with a silence that speaks of reverence, with a hush that honors, with a peace that reigns supreme, with a calm that soothes. Picture the surreal sight that unfolds with each step they take, with a movement that progresses through the miracle, with a grace that guides the faithful, with a light that leads the lost men. Women and children walk between towering walls of water, the air heavy with the scent of brine that fills the lungs, with a taste of the sea that refreshes the parched, with a coolness that soothes, with a balm that heals the wounded, with a touch that mends. The faint hum of divine power that resonates in the bones, with a vibration that stirs the spirit, with a life that pulses with energy, that surges with a force that moves the heart, and the sound of waves held in suspension. A stillness that defies the sea's wild nature, with a quiet that calms the heart, with a peace that reigns, with a tranquility that restores the weary, with a silence that speaks, with a voice that comforts the soul. The waters stand still, their surfaces reflecting the stars above, with a canopy of light that frames their path, with a glow that guides the lost, with a beacon that shines, with a radiance that leads the way, with a light that pierces, and the fire of their torches below, with a warmth that comforts the fearful, with a heat that sustains, with a light that warms the spirit, with a glow that heals. A bridge between earth and heaven that holds, with a strength that endures through the trial, with a power that supports, with a might that lifts the fallen, with a force that uplifts. The ground beneath is firm, the sand crunching with each step, with a sound that marks their progress, with a rhythm that beats, with a pulse that lives, with a life that flows, with a current that carries the faithful. The air alive with the murmur of prayers that rise like incense, with a fragrance that ascends to the heavens, with a sweetness that pleases, with an aroma that lifts the spirit, with a perfume that soothes. The soft cries of children that pierce the silence, with a note that touches the soul, with a tenderness that moves, with a compassion that heals the broken, with a mercy that comforts. And the rustle of garments that move, with a whisper that flows like a river, with a current that carries the faithful, with a stream that guides the lost, with a path that opens. A symphony of deliverance that plays, with a harmony that lifts the spirit to new heights, with a music that inspires, with a melody that soothes the weary, with a tune that heals. Pharaoh's chariots thunder into the passage, their wheels grinding against the seabed with a sound that grates on the nerves, with a harshness that jars the senses, with a discord that clashes, with a noise that wounds the ear, with a pain that lingers. Their horses' hooves pounding with a rhythm that races, with a fury that chases the prey, with a speed that threatens, with a danger that looms, with a peril that advances. But the ground betrays them, becoming treacherous under God's will, with a shift that undermines their strength, with a weakness that fails, with a fall that crumbles into dust, with a collapse that shatters. The sand moving like a living thing that resists, with a force that overcomes the mighty, with a power that prevails, with a might that conquers the foe, with a strength that endures. As Moses stretches his hand toward the heavens, with a gesture that commands the elements, with a will that shapes the world, with a purpose that fulfills the promise, with a plan that guides. The waters collapse with a roar that shakes the earth, with a power that resounds through the ages, with a thunder that deafens the ear, with a sound that echoes through the night, with a noise that reverberates. A force that drowns the cries of the pursuers, with a fury that consumes the wicked, with a judgment that falls, with a weight that crushes the proud, with a might that prevails. Swallowing the army in a torrent of judgment that surges, with a power that spares none, with a mercy that ends, with a silence that follows the storm, with a calm that settles. The dawn breaks, its light revealing the Israelites on the far shore, with a vision that heals the wounded, with a balm that soothes the pain, with a touch that mends the broken. Their enemies vanquished, with a silence that falls like a veil that covers the fallen, with a peace that reigns. The sea calm once more, its surface a mirror of peace that reflects the sky, with a stillness that soothes the soul, with a tranquility that restores the weary, with a calm that heals, with a serenity that lifts. They lift their voices in praise, a song that rises, with a harmony that lifts the spirit to the heights, with a joy that overflows, with a gladness that sings, with a melody that lifts the heart. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him. My Father's God, and I will exalt him. Exodus 15:2. A hymn that echoes through the ages, with a sound that endures through the night, with a resonance that lasts, with a music that lives, with a tune that heals the soul, with a note that comforts. The Book of Jubilees hints at angelic songs accompanying this victory. A celestial chorus that blends with human joy, with a music that transcends the earthly, with a harmony that lifts the spirit. Their voices, a symphony that lifts the heart to the heavens, with a melody that inspires the faithful, with a sound that guides, with a light that leads, with a path that opens. What does the Red Sea teach us? A lesson carved in the waters, that part with a sound that roars through the night, with a power that shakes the foundations of the earth, with a force that moves the mountains, with a might that prevails. It reveals a God who makes a way where none exists. A deliverer who fights when we are still, with a strength that prevails over the foe, with a might that conquers the enemy, with a power that overcomes the chaos, with a will that endures. A force that commands the disorder, with a word that creates, with a voice that shapes the world, with a purpose that fulfills the promise, with a plan that guides. Like the Israelites, we face our own seas, impossible barriers of fear that grip the heart with icy fingers, that freeze the blood, with a chill that numbs the mind, with a cold that bites the flesh, with a sharpness that stings the skin, with a pain that lingers. Doubt that clouds the mind, with shadows that obscure the path, with a darkness that blinds the vision, with a gloom that oppresses the spirit, with a weight that crushes the soul, with a burden that overwhelms. Or loss that weighs the heart, with a load that bends the back, with a force that breaks the spirit, with a sorrow that aches. Have you stood before such a sea? Its waves threatening to overwhelm with their might, that surges with a power that threatens to drown the hope, with a depth that engulfs the light. Its depths a promise of drowning that chills the soul, with a cold that bites the flesh, with a sharpness that cuts the skin, with a wound that bleeds. A barrier that looms, with a threat that daunts the spirit, with a fear that grips the heart, with a terror that shakes the foundation, with a tremor that moves. The crossing calls us to trust, to stand still as God moves, with a hand that parts the waters, with a power that divides the impossible, with a strength that overcomes the odds, with a might that prevails over the storm. A faith that holds firm in the tempest, with a resolve that endures through the trial, with a courage that stands tall against the tide, with a force that resists. As Isaiah 43:2 promises, with a voice that comforts, with a word that soothes the aching heart, with a balm that heals the wound, with a touch that mends the broken, with a grace that restores. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. What sea blocks your path today? A wall that towers with a height that daunts the spirit, with a shadow that falls across the way, with a darkness that threatens the light, with a gloom that oppresses. And will you trust his power to part it, with a might that overcomes the barriers, with a force that prevails over the enemy, with a strength that conquers? His presence to guide you through, with a light that shines, with a glow that leads the lost, with a path that opens before the faithful, with a road that guides the weary. The journey continues into the wilderness, a land of barren beauty, where the sun scorches the skin with its unrelenting heat that burns, with a fire that sears the flesh, with a pain that lingers like a scar that marks the body, with a wound that aches. And the wind whispers secrets that stir the soul, with a breath that speaks, with a voice that calls the faithful, with a summons that draws the heart, with a pull that moves the spirit, with a force that lifts. A vast expanse that tests the spirit with its silence, that deafens the ear, with a quiet that oppresses the mind, with a stillness that weighs the soul, with a burden that bends. Imagine the vast caravan, millions moving as one, with a unity that binds the people, with a cord that holds the community together, with a strength that endures through the storm, with a power that sustains. A sea of humanity that stretches across the dunes, with a rhythm that flows like a river through the desert, with a current that carries the weary, with a flow that nourishes. The air filled with the bleat of livestock that echoes through the valleys, with a sound that resonates with life, that pulses with energy, that surges with a force that moves. The rustle of garments that whispers in the breeze, with a softness that soothes the afflicted, with a touch that comforts the broken, with a gentleness that heals the wounded. In the soft tread of feet on sand that marks their passage, with a sound that endures, with a beat that persists through the night, with a rhythm that beats, with a life that flows, with a vitality that thrives, with a strength that holds. Hunger gnaws at their stomachs, a gnawing that weakens the body, with a pain that lingers like a shadow that darkens the path, with a gloom that oppresses the spirit, with a weight that crushes. Thirst parches their throats, with a dryness that burns the tongue, with a fire that scorches the spirit, with a heat that consumes the strength, with a flame that devours the hope. And murmurs rise like a tide that swells, with a force that grows, with a power that threatens the peace, with a storm that gathers, with a fury that rages, with a might that shakes. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. A feast that filled our bellies and warmed our hearts, with a comfort that fades into memory, with a longing that aches, with a sorrow that lingers, with a pain that haunts, with a ghost that pursues. Exodus 16:3. A cry that speaks of longing for the past, with a memory that haunts the soul, with a shadow that clings, with a darkness that oppresses. God responds with grace that overflows, with a mercy that sustains the hungry, with a provision that feeds the starving, with a bounty that endures. Sending manna, a flaky substance that covers the ground like frost under the morning light, with a whiteness that gleams, with a purity that shines, with a radiance that lifts the spirit, with a glow that guides. Its taste sweet like honey that soothes the palate, with a flavor that delights the senses, with a sweetness that comforts the weary, with a taste that heals the broken. A gift from heaven that descends, with a gentleness that soothes the afflicted, with a touch that mends the wounded, with a grace that restores. This is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. Moses declares with a voice that carries hope, with a tone that lifts the spirit, with a sound that inspires the faithful, with a call that guides the lost. His hands lifting the provision, with a gesture that blesses, with a touch that heals the fallen, with a mercy that uplifts. Exodus 16:15. The book of Jubilees describes it as a gift from the celestial realm, a sign of God's care that falls, with a grace that provides for the needy, with a bounty that endures through the famine, with a provision that lasts. Its flakes glistening in the dawn, with a light that shines, with a radiance that guides the lustful, with a path that opens, with a road that leads the faithful. Each morning, they gather with baskets in hand, learning trust in daily provision, with a faith that grows with each sunrise, with a strength that builds the spirit, with a power that sustains the weary. the scent of manna filling the air with a sweetness that lifts the soul with an aroma that soothes the afflicted, with a fragrance that speaks of divine bounty, with a promise that endures through the trial, with a hope that sustains the heart, with a light that shines, with a glow that comforts. Thirst follows like a shadow that darkens the path, with a gloom that oppresses the spirit, with a weight that burdens the soul, with a load that bends. Their complaints growing like a storm that gathers, with a fury that threatens the calm, with a tempest that rages, with a power that shakes the earth, with a force that moves. Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? Exodus 17:3. A wail that rises with a sound that cuts the silence, with a sharpness that stings the soul, with a pain that wounds the heart, with a sorrow that aches, with a depth that cuts. At Horeb, Moses strikes a rock with his staff, the wood resounding with a crack that echoes through the valley, with a sound that reverberates, with a power that moves the earth, with a force that shifts the ground, with a might that prevails. And water gushes forth, its coolness a balm to parched throats, with a relief that soothes the burning, with a touch that heals the afflicted, with a grace that restores. The sound, a song of relief that fills the silence, with a melody that heals, with a harmony that lifts the spirit, with a joy that overflows, with a gladness that sings. The taste, a blessing that refreshes the weary, with a flavor that restores the strength, with a sweetness that sustains the body, with a nourishment that feeds the hungry. The wilderness becomes a place of transformation, where complaints turn to lessons that shape the soul, with a wisdom that grows with each step, with a knowledge that deepens the mind, with an understanding that enlightens the spirit. A school of faith that teaches, with a discipline that refines the character, with a fire that purifies the dross, with a heat that cleanses the impurities, with a flame that burns away the chaff, with a power that transforms. The Amalekites attack, their swords flashing with a light that threatens, with a danger that looms on the horizon, with a shadow that falls across the path, with a darkness that threatens the light, with a gloom that oppresses. And Moses, with Aaron and Hur's support, with a strength that sustains the weary, with a power that holds the line, with a force that resists the foe, raises his staff, the battle swaying with his strength, with a might that prevails over the enemy, with a power that conquers the wicked. A symbol of divine favor that guides the faithful, with a light that shines, with a glow that leads the lost, with a path that opens. Victory comes with the setting sun, its light fading, with a glow that dims into the night, with a darkness that settles across the land, with a shadow that falls, with a silence that reigns. And God commands with a voice that resounds through the ages, with a decree that stands firm, with a promise that endures through time, with a strength that holds the faithful. Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered. I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven, Exodus 17:14. A vow that echoes with a sound that lasts, with a resonance that lingers, with a music that heals. The book of Jasher adds the courage of the people, their faith a shield that turns back the foe, with a force that overcomes the enemy, with a strength that conquers the wicked, with a power that prevails over the storm. Their voices, a cry of triumph that rises, with a sound that celebrates, with a joy that lifts the heart, with a song that sings, with a melody that heals the broken, with a tune that comforts. What does the wilderness reveal? A truth hidden in the sands that shift with the wind that blows through the night, with a breath that stirs the soul, with a voice that calls the faithful, with a summons that draws. It teaches reliance on God, who provides, with a hand that feeds the hungry, with a bounty that sustains the starving, with a provision that endures through the famine, with a grace that overflows, with a mercy that heals. Strength in scarcity that uplifts the fallen, with a power that lifts the spirit, with a force that restores the weary, with a strength that holds. And community in struggle that binds the broken, with a love that heals the wounds, with a touch that mends the torn, with a compassion that comforts the afflicted. Have you faced a wilderness of want? Your needs unmet, like a void that gapes with emptiness, that consumes the soul, with a hunger that devours the strength, with a pain that lingers like a shadow. Your stomach empty, with a gnawing that weakens the body, with a weakness that fails, with a frailty that breaks. Your spirit dry, with a thirst that burns, with a fire that scorches the heart, with a heat that consumes the hope, with a flame that destroys the light. Trust his manna that falls like rain, with a gentleness that soothes the weary, with a coolness that comforts the afflicted, with a touch that heals the wounded. His water that flows like a river, with a current that refreshes the parched, with a flow that sustains the thirsty, with a stream that nourishes the soul. His victory that crowns the faithful, with a glory that shines like the sun, with a light that guides the lost, with a path that opens, with a road that leads. As Philippians 4:19 assures, with a promise that holds fast, with a strength that endures through the storm, with a power that prevails over the enemy, with a might that conquers. My God will meet all your needs according to the riches of His glory in Christ Jesus. What lesson is God teaching you in your desert? A school of the soul that refines, with a fire that purifies the dross, with a heat that cleanses the impurities, with a flame that burns away the chaff, with a power that transforms the spirit. And will you learn to lean on His provision? A staff that supports through the night, with a guidance that leads the lost, with a road that guides the faithful, with a path that opens. At Sinai, the air grows thick with anticipation, a heaviness that presses on the chest, with a weight that burdens the spirit, with a load that bends the back, with a force that oppresses the soul, with a pressure that weighs. The mountain looming like a sentinel that guards the divine, with a presence that awes the beholder, with a majesty that inspires the heart, with a vision that lifts the spirit. Its peaks crowned with clouds that swirl, with a mystery that intrigues the mind, with a wonder that captivates the imagination, with a curiosity that draws the soul. God declares with a voice that thunders through the heavens, with a sound that shakes the earth, with a power that moves the foundations, with a force that resonates through the ages. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Exodus 19:6. A call that lifts the spirit to new heights, with a promise that inspires the faithful, with a hope that soars above the storm, with a flight that elevates the heart. For 3 days, they prepare, washing clothes with hands that tremble with reverence, with a care that honors the sacred, with a devotion that blesses the soul, with a purity that cleanses the spirit, abstaining with hearts that yearn for the divine, with a longing that burns within the depths, with a fire that glows, with a light that shines, with a radiance that guides the lost. The camp buzzing with a sound of preparation that rises, with a hymn of readiness that echoes through the valley, with a melody that lifts the spirit, with a joy that overflows, with a gladness that sings, with a tune that heals. The third day dawns with thunder that rolls across the sky, with a roar that resounds, with a power that shakes the ground, with a force that moves the earth, with a might that prevails. Lightning that flashes, with a light that blinds, with a brilliance that stuns the eye, with a glow that dazzles the vision, with a radiance that shines. And a thick cloud that descends, with a weight that presses, with a force that overwhelms the senses, with a burden that bows the knee, with a reverence that humbles the proud. The trumpets blast, shaking the earth, with a sound that pierces the soul, with a call that summons the chosen, with a power that draws the heart, with a pull that moves the spirit, with a strength that lifts. The Book of Jubilees describes a cosmic event, the ground trembling as God descends, with a glory that blinds the eye, with a light that dazzles the vision, with a brilliance that stuns, with a glow that overwhelms the beholder. The air alive with the scent of ozone that fills the lungs, with a freshness that cleanses the spirit, with a breath that renews the soul, with a life that pulses with energy, in the weight of holiness that bows the knee, with a reverence that humbles the proud, with a submission that heals the broken, with a grace that restores the fallen. Moses ascends, disappearing into the cloud, with a step that echoes, with a sound that fades into the mist, with a silence that falls, with a hush that settles, with a calm that soothes the storm. Receiving the 10 Commandments, a law that reflects God's character, with a clarity that guides, with a wisdom that endures through the ages, with a strength that holds against the tide, with a power that resists the flood. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Exodus 22:3. A foundation that stands firm, with a might that endures through the ages, with a force that prevails. The people pledge with one voice, a chorus that rises, with a harmony that lifts the spirit, with a joy that overflows, with a gladness that sings, with a melody that heals the broken. We will do everything the Lord has said. Exodus 19:8. A vow that echoes through the camp, with a sound that resonates, with a commitment that binds the heart, with a cord that holds, with a strength that sustains the faithful. Yet their faith wavers like a flame in the wind, with a flicker that falters under the pressure, with a weakness that shows, with a doubt that lingers, with a shadow that falls across the path. The golden calf follows, a betrayal born of impatience that stains the soul, with a mark that lingers, with a shadow that darkens the heart, with a gloom that oppresses the spirit, with a weight that burdens the soul, with a load that crushes the strength, with a force that breaks. As Moses lingers on the mountain, with a presence that withdraws into the cloud, with a mystery that hides the divine, with a veil that conceals the glory. The people demand with voices that rise like a storm, with a fury that threatens the peace, with a tempest that rages, with a power that shakes the earth, with a force that moves the ground. Make us gods who will go before us, Exodus 32:1. A cry that betrays the covenant, with a sound that grieves the spirit, with a pain that wounds the soul, with a sorrow that aches, with a depth that cuts the heart, with a wound that bleeds. A plea that pierces the spirit, with a grief that lingers. Aaron fashions a calf from their gold, with hands that shape the metal, with a craft that deceives, with a lie that binds the spirit, with a chain that holds the soul, with a bondage that enslaves the mind, with a trap that ensnares. The surface gleaming with a light that blinds the eye, with a shine that misleads the vision, with a glow that deceives the heart, with a falsehood that traps. And they worship with a fervor that consumes the mind, with a passion that burns the spirit, with a fire that rages, with a heat that scorches the soul, with a flame that destroys. The air thick with the scent of incense that masks their sin, with a fragrance that deceives, with a sweetness that hides the truth, with a lie that binds the spirit, with a snare that holds. The sound of revelry, a discord that jars the soul, with a noise that clashes with the harmony of heaven, with a sound that grates on the ear, with a harshness that wounds the senses, with a pain that lingers. God's anger burns, a fire that threatens to consume, with a heat that scorches the earth, with a flame that destroys the wicked, with a judgment that falls, with a weight that crushes the proud, with a might that prevails. But Moses intercedes with a plea that rises, with a voice that pleads, with a depth that moves the heart, with a love that sacrifices the self, with a willingness that offers the life. Please forgive their sin, but if not, then blot me out of the book you have written, Exodus 32:32. A offering that heals, with a grace that intercedes for the lost, with a mercy that restores the fallen, with a touch that mends. The calf is destroyed, ground to powder, with a sound that crunches, with a noise that grates on the ear, with a harshness that stings the senses, with a pain that endures through the night. A plague follows, with a shadow that falls, with a weight that oppresses the body, with a burden that weighs the spirit, with a load that crushes the soul. Yet God renews the covenant, with a mercy that restores the broken, with a grace that lifts the fallen, with a hand that heals. Declaring with a voice that heals, with a tone that soothes the wounded, with a balm that comforts the aching, with a peace that calms. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, Exodus 34:6. A promise that endures through the trial, with a hope that sustains the weary, with a light that shines, with a glow that guides. What does the calf teach? A lesson carved in gold that glitters with a shine that blinds the vision, with a light that deceives the eye, with a glow that misleads the heart, with a wind that binds the spirit, with a chain that holds it warns of idolatry, the heart's turn from God to its own making, with a craft that deceives, with a falsehood that traps the soul, with a bondage that enslaves the mind, with a snare that ensnares the spirit. A creation that falls into ruin, with a collapse that shatters the false, with a fall that crumbles into dust, with a ruin that decays. Have you crafted your own calf ambition that blinds the eye, with a vision that obscures the truth, with a fog that hides the path, with a darkness that envelops the soul? Comfort that lulls the spirit, with a peace that fades into nothingness, with a silence that deceives the heart, with a quiet that betrays the faithful. Or pride that deceives the mind, with a falsehood that traps the soul in chains, with a bondage that enslaves the spirit, with a weight that crushes the strength, with a load that breaks. Repent and trust his mercy that forgives, with a hand that lifts, with a strength that saves the lost, with a power that redeems the fallen, with a grace that heals the broken, with a touch that mends. As 1 John 1 promises, with a voice that restores, with a word that heals the broken, with a touch that mends the torn, with a mercy that comforts the afflicted, with a compassion that soothes. If we confess our sins, he He is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. The tabernacle rises, a sanctuary where God dwells with a presence that sanctifies the holy ground, with a holiness that awes the beholder, with a majesty that inspires the heart, with a vision that lifts the spirit, with a light that shines, a dwelling of glory that lifts the soul to new heights, with a radiance that guides the lost. Let them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Exodus 25:8. God commands with a voice that calls the faithful, with a summons that draws the heart, with a pull that moves the soul, with a force that stirs the spirit, with a power that lifts. A decree that resonates, with a sound that echoes through the ages, with a music that lifts the spirit, with a melody that soothes the weary, with a tune that heals. Imagine the camp alive with offerings gold, that gleams with a light that shines, with a radiance that dazzles the eye, with a brilliance that stuns the vision, with a glow that overwhelms the senses. Silver that chimes with a sound that resonates, with a music that lifts the soul, with a harmony that soothes the afflicted, with a melody that comforts. Fine linen that whispers with a softness that comforts the broken, with a touch that heals the wounded, with a gentleness that mends the air, filled with the scent of craftsmanship, with an aroma that fills the senses, with a fragrance that pleases the spirit, with a perfume that lifts the heart, the sound of hammers on metal that rings with a clang that echoes through the valley, with a noise that reverberates, with a power that moves the earth, with a force that shakes, the rustle of fabrics that moves, with a whisper that flows like a river of peace, with a current that carries the faithful, with a stream that guides the lost, with a path that opens. The ark, the mercy seat with cherubim that guard, with wings that shelter the sacred, with a protection that holds the holy, with a strength that endures through the storm, the veil that separates, with a barrier that keeps the divine apart, with a division that sanctifies the ground, with a purity that cleanses the soul, all reflect God's holiness. A beauty that awes, with a splendor that overwhelms the beholder, with a vision that inspires the faithful, with a hope that endures through the ages, with a light that shines. The book of Jubilees sees it as a mirror of heaven, a glimpse of the eternal that descends, with a vision that lifts the spirit, with a light that guides the lost, with a path that opens, with a road that leads. A reflection that leads the weary, with a guidance that sustains. God's glory fills it, a cloud so radiant Moses cannot enter, with a light that blinds the eye, with a brilliance that stuns, with a glow that dazzles the vision, with a radiance that overwhelms the senses. A presence that overwhelms, with a weight that bows the knee, with a reverence that humbles the proud, with a submission that heals the broken, with a grace that restores the fallen. A holiness that sanctifies the ground, with a purity that cleanses the soul, with a touch that purifies the spirit, with a mercy that lifts. What does the tabernacle reveal? A truth that dwells within, with a presence that transforms the heart, with a touch that heals the wounded, with a grace that restores the fallen, with a mercy that lifts the spirit, with a love that redeems God's desire to be near. A closeness that changes the soul, with a compassion that comforts the afflicted, with a hand that guides the lost, with a light that shines. A presence that transforms the being, with a power that sustains. Have you sought his presence in the silence of your soul, with a longing that burns within the depths, with a fire that glows, with a light that shines, with a radiance that guides the faithful, with a path that opens, with a road that leads, as John 1:14 declares, with a promise that lives, with a word that endures through the ages, with a strength that holds the spirit, with a power that lifts. The word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. How will you invite him into the tabernacle of your heart? A sanctuary within that holds, with a peace that reigns supreme, with a calm that soothes the storm, with a tranquility that heals the broken, with a mercy that comforts. This journey ends, but its lessons endure trust that holds through the night, with a strength that sustains the weary, with a power that supports the broken, with a force that lifts the fallen. Obedience that frees the spirit, with a liberty that lifts the soul, with a freedom that soars above the chains, with a flight that inspires the faithful. Worship that lifts the heart, with a song that rises to the heavens, with a melody that praises the divine, with a music that heals the wounded, with a tune that comforts. What will you take from this? A treasure for your being, with a value that lasts through the ages, with a worth that endures through the trial, with a strength that holds the spirit. The God of Exodus is yours, a guide eternal, with a light that shines through the darkness, with a glow that leads the lost, with a path that opens with a road that guides the weary, with a hope that sustains.